You remember her smile not because it was kind, but because it arrived when you hesitated. That smile that didn't warm you, but observed you, measured you, as if it already knew you would fail some test you hadn't realized had begun. You thought it meant love, approval, softness, but it was the smirk of a lioness watching prey forget it is prey. You spoke gently, you folded yourself in politeness. You tried to become the man she could love, and in doing so, you killed the only man she could feel. There is something ancient in the way she turned from you, not dramatic, not cruel, just indifferent, as if your certainty evaporated, and with it, your body. She does not remember what you said. She only remembers that you flinched, and still. You wonder why she drifted, why your silence felt weak, why your devotion became invisible. You tell yourself you were too much, but the truth is simpler, darker, unforgivable. You were not too much. You were not enough to resist kneeling. You were not enough to be feared. You were taught that to be loved, you must soften your voice. You were told that strength must be tucked beneath apology, that desire must be diluted with virtue, that certainty must be made edible through restraint. And so you became a sculptor of masks, one for laughter, one for empathy, one for harmlessness. You rehearsed kindness as a ritual, hoping it would be enough. But when she looked at you, she saw none of it. She was not searching for the man who made himself safe. She was searching for the one who didn't care to be. She smiled the first time you apologized for interrupting yourself. It was not affection, it was recognition, the kind you offer a statue already cracked. She could already see where you would bend. She could already smell the absence of danger beneath your warmth. That smile wasn't praise. It was quiet confirmation that you had already forfeited the crown before she even approached the throne. You mistook that smile for an invitation. You thought you had touched her through sensitivity, but she did not want your submission. She wanted to feel the tremor of something stronger than her, not physically, not violently, but spiritually. The man who could walk away without explanation. The one whose silence carried threat. The one who was so complete in himself that her presence could not seduce him into disintegration. That was the man she would have followed. But you folded. You surrendered your edge in exchange for inclusion. You begged for clarity when mystery would have kept her breathless. You gave answers where silence was demanded. You became her mirror instead of her storm. And so she turned from you, not out of cruelty, but out of instinct. Instinct that despises a man who forgets the cruelty of being whole. She never asked you to be weak. She never asked you to explain. But you offered it all anyway, your guilt, your uncertainty, your need to be seen. You offered your soul like a servant holding up a platter, and she walked past it, because there is no hunger for the man who bleeds himself at the altar of acceptance. There is only disdain, not loud, not spoken, just the quiet closing of the door behind her. You do not understand what you did wrong. You were kind, you were open, you were generous with your time and your affection, but none of these were sacrifices. They were insurance. You traded in softness because you feared the consequences of standing firm. You asked her to love the version of you that could not endure without permission, and when she left, you called her cold. But she was only responding to a truth you refused to face, that no one worships a man who bows before he is commanded to. You wanted her to be your judge. You asked her what kind of man you should be. You shaped your speech to avoid offense, your presence to avoid intimidation, your desire to avoid rejection. You buried the instinct that once made you wild, and she could feel it, the castration of your will. You mistook that for safety, but she saw a cage with an open door and a man still sitting inside. She did not want to decorate that cage. She wanted to see if you had the strength to leave it. Every time you sought her approval, you lost her gaze. Every time you spoke to be understood, she stopped listening. She did not come to teach you how to be a man. She came to see if you already were one. The test was silent, and you failed it with every careful word. You thought that being chosen would complete you, but she was not looking for someone to complete. She was looking for something to fear. Not fear in the sense of violence or domination, but the sacred dread that comes when standing before a man who does not need to be desired. The man who speaks as if no one is listening, who walks away as if the world will follow, who does not explain himself, because his existence is already enough. You tried to be perfect for her, but perfection is sterile. What she craved was madness wrapped in control. The beast behind the mask, the lion who chose, for now, to remain seated. But you showed her the absence of the beast. You showed her only predictability, and predictability is death. It is the soft coffin in which all passion suffocates. You believed that if you showed her your wounds, she would stay to bandage them, but she was never a healer. She was a hunter, and you bled too easily. She needed to fight to reach you. She needed to earn your secrets, not be handed them. She needed resistance. Instead, you handed her your spine like a gift. You began to perform sincerity. You began to perform vulnerability. You believed that these would draw her closer. But nothing is more repulsive than a performance meant to extract affection. She saw through it. She always does. Because no matter how noble the gesture, the scent of desperation betrays the giver. She left, not because she did not see value in you, but because you could not see it yourself without her reflection. She left because you believed her attention made you whole, because you looked at her as if she were the sun and forgot you were ever fire. You ask why she preferred the man who spoke less, who never explained himself, who vanished and returned as he pleased. You think she is broken for craving him, but it was not him she craved, it was the abyss he carried. The certainty that he did not need her to define himself, that he had already faced solitude and returned with sharpened teeth. You still carry the wound, not because she hurt you, but because she revealed that your softness was not strength. It was fear. Fear disguised as morality, fear disguised as respect, fear that you wrapped in ribbons and handed to her as if it were courage. But now you are alone, and in that silence, you feel something stirring. Not rage, not regret, but the faint shape of the man you were before you began asking for permission to exist. He is not polite. He does not wait. He does not explain. He speaks, and the world rearranges itself. He does not care who stays or who leaves because he never bends to be chosen. She would have followed that man. She would have feared him. She would have knelt, not because he demanded it, but because something ancient in her recognized something older in him. But now, it is you who kneels, and the echo of her footsteps is all that remains. You stood before her like a soldier waiting for orders, hoping she would raise her hand and grant you meaning. You did not see how her eyes grew cold each time you asked what she needed. You thought your attentiveness would warm her, but all she saw was a man who had forgotten his own fire and now begged to borrow hers. And what woman respects a man who must be given permission to burn? She tested you, quietly, not with words, but with glances, silences, withdrawal. She withheld affection not out of cruelty, but to see if your hunger would turn to thunder or begging. And you, like a child who mistook discipline for abandonment, reached even further. You opened your chest wider. You gave her your plans, your dreams, your past, as if your exposure would convince her to stay. But each revelation only deepened her boredom. You thought love was earned by transparency. You didn't see that your honesty had no edge. You were not a sword. You were glass. You were never dangerous, only available. She wanted a mirror that cracked when touched, not one that polished itself to reflect her every mood. She looked at you and saw her own indecision echoed back. That was not intimacy, that was inertia, and inertia rots desire. When you spoke, you always left space for her to agree. You dulled your voice so she would never feel eclipsed. You filtered every truth through a veil of politeness, but she did not want a man who feared being misunderstood. She wanted a man who spoke as if the world had no choice but to understand. A man whose certainty did not ask for affirmation. A man whose presence was not sculpted for her approval, but born of something far older than her gaze. You mistook equality for erasure. You leveled yourself so thoroughly that there was no mountain left to climb. And she, drawn by nature to rise through conquest, found herself walking a flat land without wind. You confused compliance with virtue. You confused support with submission. You didn't realize that the more you obeyed, the less she could see you. She did not betray you. You betrayed yourself in front of her. You thought love meant dissolving your sharpness. You shaved down your instincts. You edited your hunger. You made yourself smooth and safe, and called it romantic. But nothing about you remained untamed. Nothing in you whispered of risk. She could not fall in love with you because you had already fallen in fear of displeasing her. And now you remember the other man, the one who spoke without restraint, the one she claimed to hate, yet whose name surfaced in her silences. He did not flatter, he did not apologize, he made no promises, but she watched him. She burned when he entered the room. And you told yourself she was confused, that she was drawn to pain. But it wasn't pain, it was presence. He was there for himself, not for her. He was not the mirror, he was the flame. You tried to mimic him once. You raised your voice. You refused something small. She smiled, surprised. But even that was counterfeit, your rebellion still calculated. Your edge still fearful. You didn't speak from power. You performed it. And she saw the tremor beneath your posture. You lived in her gaze like a tenant renting space. Every gesture was a negotiation, every moment a calculation. But she was not a landlord. She was a witness, and you gave her nothing to watch. You extinguished every flicker of wildness before it could offend. You censored yourself until you became invisible. And yet, you blame her for leaving. You call her cold, fickle, ungrateful. You accuse her of choosing men who hurt her. But you never hurt her not because you were good, but because you had no impact. You were gentle not out of discipline, but because you feared consequence. Your morality was convenience. Your patience was avoidance. Your love was obedience. You forget that women test men not because they want to dominate, but because they want to believe, and belief must be earned in fire. You were not forged. You were molded. You bent before she even applied pressure. She asked you nothing, and still you offered everything. She revealed no need, yet you rushed to fulfill it. You thought that love meant anticipation, but what you called foresight, she felt as control. You robbed her of the mystery of wanting. You filled every silence with offerings she never asked for, and in doing so, you left her nothing to long for. You stood like a shrine, hoping to be worshipped for your devotion. But shrines are made of stone. They do not breathe. They do not bleed. She kissed you out of kindness, not passion. She stayed out of comfort, not hunger, and you mistook that for victory. You ask yourself why it was not enough. You gave her loyalty, but she did not want loyalty from a man who could not even remain loyal to his own instincts. You gave her consistency, but consistency without conviction is monotony. You gave her attention, But attention from the empty is a mirror she has seen before. The truth she needed you to say no. Not to her, but to yourself. To the version of you that performs affection to be accepted. To the boy who still waits to be validated. To the man who believes that obedience is noble. That softness is strength. That submission is love. She did not leave because she wanted to dominate. She left because you could not resist domination. She left because there was nothing left in you to defy her with. Because even in silence, you surrendered. And she could not fall for someone who did not know how to stay standing. Now you sit in the ruins of your restraint. You analyze every word you said. Every moment you were too kind, too patient, too open. You call it a mystery, but it is not. The answer was always there, beneath your tongue, wrapped in the words you never spoke because you feared they would drive her away. And yes, they might have. But the man who does not risk loss never becomes unforgettable. You thought love was safety, but she was looking for gravity. She wanted the man who did not flinch when her storms came, the one who stared back without blinking, the one who did not ask, "What do you want from me?" but demanded, "Can you bear what I am?" You were the mirror, and she shattered you, not with malice, but with absence. And as you pick up the pieces, they do not cut, because you were never sharp, not with her, not with yourself, not even now. There is a particular kind of silence that follows explanation, the silence not of peace, but of death. You gave her all your reasons. You told her how much you cared, how deeply you tried, how every word you said was chosen with caution, how your love was carved from discipline, but she did not respond with understanding. She only blinked, slow and unshaken, as if listening to the fading echo of a song she no longer remembered ever enjoying. That silence was not confusion, it was finality. You mistook it for an invitation to say more, and so you buried yourself with words. You tried to clarify your strength. You wanted her to know you had backbone, that you simply chose not to show it, that you could be dangerous, if only there were reason. But strength that requires defense is not strength. It is confession. You said you didn't want to control her. You said you respected her space. But every apology you whispered beneath those words betrayed a deeper truth, that you feared being misunderstood more than you feared being forgotten. She did not punish you. She vanished, not in anger, in silence. That is always how the abyss arrives, without fanfare, without scream, without explanation. Just the quiet disintegration of attention. You were still speaking when she stopped seeing you. You were still proving when she stopped believing. She had been gone long before she left the room. You remember the last time she looked at you. Her gaze did not hold contempt. It held absence. She no longer searched you for mystery. She no longer listened for pulse. What she saw was a man still trying to win a war whose battlefield had already been swallowed by weeds. You tried to evoke the past, the tenderness, the laughter, the memories. But she did not respond to nostalgia. She responded to presence, and in that moment, you were only a monument to your former self. You cannot recall when it began, the hunger in her eyes turning to distance. It was not a betrayal. It was a decay, not a storm, a withering. You trace it back to your apologies, to the moments you thought vulnerability meant exposure, when in truth it meant erosion. You told her how much you needed her, but she did not want to be needed. She wanted to be chosen by a man who did not crumble when left alone in the dark. You imagined she was ungrateful, that she did not appreciate your steadiness. But it was not steadiness. It was stagnation. You did not evolve in her presence. You shrank. You became smaller with each effort to make her stay. You built a cage out of compromise, and then you begged her not to fly. You thought the problem was that she was too complex, that no man could satisfy her hunger. But the problem was not her. It was your disappearance. The slow, obedient vanishing of your authority. She wanted to see if you would ever say no. Not to her body, not to her love, but to the false self you became to keep her interested. She wanted to see you resist your own performance, and you never did. You waited for her to ask for your truth. But truth never waits to be invited. It erupts, it declares, it disturbs. Yours remained wrapped in silk, asleep in your throat, waiting for the right moment that never came. You think now of all the things you should have said not as attacks, but as fire, and fire, even when rejected, is still seen. She never told you what she needed, and you assumed this was a game. You tried to decode her silence, read between her sighs, interpret her distance like scripture. But it was never about what she needed. It was about who you were when nothing was asked. And who you were, without prompt, was compliant. You filled every empty space with affection, every pause with reassurance, every uncertainty with eagerness. But love does not grow in saturation. It grows in shadow. She needed to wonder what you might say next. She needed to question whether she had reached the bottom of you. Instead, you laid yourself bare, again and again, until mystery became routine, and routine became repulsion. You begged for clarity. She gave you silence. That was your answer. The woman who cannot feel you is the woman who must leave you. Not because you were cruel, but because you were digestible. She left not out of rebellion, but because you were no longer difficult to forget. Now you sit with the memory of her eyes, that abyss, not angry, not cruel, not dismissive, just empty, as if waiting for you to finally become the man she once imagined you could be. You call it heartbreak, but it is not. It is revelation. You were not betrayed. You were revealed to yourself. You remember the man you were before you met her, unpolished, inconvenient, full of edges that did not apologize. He was not liked by all, but he was real. She would have followed that man, even if it terrified her, even if it broke her, because that man was not built for her approval. He was built for himself. And she, despite her defiance, still worshipped what she could not predict. You do not mourn her. You mourn the part of you that you strangled to keep her close. You mourn the man who once spoke without waiting to be loved. The one who roared, not to be heard, but because silence was unacceptable. You think now of strength, not the performance of masculinity, but the refusal to collapse, the refusal to explain your existence, the refusal to bow before the sacred altar of romantic safety. You remember that strength is not what bends to be admired. It is what stands, even when abandoned. She never hated you. She forgot you, and that is worse. Because forgetting does not come from pain, it comes from indifference. And indifference is born in the face of the predictable. You wanted to be her peace, but peace is not what she sought. She sought the man whose peace is disturbed by nothing, not even her. You look back and wonder why she stopped calling, why her replies became shorter, why her eyes no longer widened at your voice. But the answer is simple. The man she fell for never arrived. He was lost beneath your eagerness to be enough. And now you know, certainty is not arrogance. It is gravity. It does not chase. It does not plead. It simply is. And the world bends around it. She, too, would have bent. Not because she is weak, but because the feminine, in its purest state, yields to what does not yield. You became understandable, and therefore unnecessary, and you will remember that when you meet her again, not her, but another, the same fire, different name. You will remember not to shrink. You will remember not to offer your spine. You will remember not to ask for love, but to embody what is loved when it cannot be tamed. And she the next, she will not smile politely, she will not praise you, she will test you, she will provoke you, she will search for the fracture, and if she does not find one, she will stay somewhere, in a room you've never entered. A candle burns without flicker, it does not light the space, it does not warm the air, it simply burns untouched, untouched, untouched. She stands at its edge, barefoot, expressionless, watching it. She does not reach for it. She waits to see if it moves. It never does. You are not in the room. You are not even in her memory. But she still checks the flame, from time to time wondering what would have happened if it had roared instead of whispered. Outside, a man walks past without turning his head. His footsteps do not slow. His back is straight. He leaves no note. The candle does not go out. And she does not follow. Not because she doesn't want to, but because she cannot tell whether he ever truly saw her, or if he was only ever looking at himself, in her